Disappear and rebuild yourself. Introduction. There comes a moment in every person's life when the noise of the world becomes too loud, the weight of expectations becomes too heavy, and the path ahead becomes too blurred to see clearly. In that moment, a quiet voice inside whispers something that many ignore, something simple yet powerful, something that can transform the entire course of a life. Step away, disappear for a while, and begin again. This is not an act of escape, nor a sign of weakness, nor a retreat from reality, but rather a return to the essence of who you truly are beneath everything that has accumulated on top of you. It is a return to the core, to the self you abandoned along the way, to the clarity you once had but lost in the crowded spaces of obligation, noise, and constant movement. To disappear does not mean to erase yourself from the world. It means to create a sacred distance between you and everything that distorts your inner vision. It means choosing silence over chaos, awareness over routine, intention over confusion, and self-respect over self-neglect. For as long as you remain trapped in the cycle of rushing, reacting, proving, pleasing, and surviving, you cannot hear the deeper voice within you that knows exactly how to rebuild your life, where you truly belong, and who you are meant to become. Disappearing is the decision to stop walking blindly and to begin seeing with new eyes.
In a world where people are constantly pressured to be present, available, productive, and visible, choosing to disappear for a while becomes an act of inner rebellion, a reclaiming of your personal space, and a declaration that your soul deserves time to breathe. You do not rebuild a house while living inside the ruins. You clear the space, lay down new foundations, and design a structure that aligns with the life you want to live, not the one you were forced to endure. The same is true for the self. You cannot rebuild yourself while surrounded by the same noise that broke you, the same habits that drained you, the same distractions that scattered your focus, and the same patterns that kept you small. You need room. You need stillness. You need space to understand what happened, what it meant, and what must change. The journey of disappearing is not physical as much as it is internal. It is the choice to withdraw your energy from what no longer feeds your growth. It is the willingness to stop participating in conversations that exhaust you, expectations that suffocate you, relationships that confuse you, and routines that make you feel stuck in a life you never chose. Disappearing is about observing the world rather than being consumed by it, about listening to your internal voice rather than reacting to external noise, about rediscovering the parts of yourself that were buried under years of responsibilities, disappointments, mistakes, pressures, and unspoken pain. As you step away from the chaos, a strange calmness begins to form around you. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because silence exposes the thoughts you have been avoiding, the truths you never confronted, the emotions you pushed aside, and the dreams you abandoned. But silence also reveals possibilities that noise hides, clarity that confusion clouds, and strength that stress weakens. In this silence, you start to see yourself with a new kind of honesty, without judgment or masks or pretenses. You see what you have become and what you can still become. You see what needs to remain and what must be released. You see the distance between the person you are and the person you want to be. Rebuilding yourself is not about turning into someone completely different. It is about returning to the version of you that you were always meant to be but could not become because life got in the way. It is about stripping away the layers of doubt, fear, insecurity, confusion, guilt, pressure, and emotional noise that have accumulated over the years. It is about remembering your own voice after hearing so many others. It is about learning to move with intention, to choose with clarity, to act with direction, and to live aligned with your deepest truth. Rebuilding is slow, quiet, and deeply personal. It does not happen in a single moment. It unfolds gradually, like the soft expansion of dawn after a long night. Rebuilding yourself also means confronting the emotional weight you have been carrying. Pain that was never processed does not disappear. It hides in your reactions, your relationships, your doubts, and your self-image. Fear that was never faced becomes a silent barrier that shapes your choices. Wounds that were never healed become stories you tell yourself about what you deserve and what you are capable of. As you rebuild, you stop running from these parts of your inner world. You sit with them, understand them, and transform them into strength instead of letting them remain invisible chains. There is a profound strength that comes from knowing yourself deeply, from understanding your weaknesses without shame and your strengths without arrogance. You begin to rebuild not only your habits and your routines, but also the way you speak to yourself, the way you interpret your experiences, the way you handle your emotions, and the way you view your own potential. You learn to give yourself compassion instead of criticism, patience instead of pressure, discipline instead of chaos, and clarity instead of confusion. This inner transformation reflects outwardly in your decisions, your energy, your goals, and your presence in the world.
As you rebuild yourself, you learn to detach from the need for constant validation, approval, and recognition. You realize that confidence does not come from the eyes of others, but from the alignment between who you are and who you aspire to be. You understand that peace is not something you find outside, but something you create inside yourself. You discover that purpose is not given to you, but shaped by the choices you make each day. You start to see that strength is not loud or aggressive, but quiet, steady, and deeply rooted in self-knowledge. Over time, disappearing becomes less about escaping the world and more about returning to yourself. You no longer see solitude as emptiness, but as clarity. You no longer fear silence because you have learned to listen to your inner voice. You no longer feel lost because you have rebuilt a life from the inside out, guided by intention rather than noise. You re-enter the world not as someone hiding, but as someone who has found themselves again. You carry a new presence, calm yet powerful, silent yet certain, humble yet unshakable.
In the end, disappearing and rebuilding yourself is not a single moment, but a lifelong practice. It is the courage to step back whenever you feel overwhelmed, the wisdom to realign your path whenever you feel lost, and the strength to rebuild as many times as necessary. Life will break you, change you, challenge you, and reshape you, but you are never powerless. You can always begin again. You can always return to yourself. You can always rise from the quiet place inside you where your true self waits patiently for you to listen. To disappear is to pause. To rebuild is to rise. And between the pause and the rise, you will discover the person you were always destined to become.
Chapter 1. The Quiet Confrontation with Yourself. There comes a period in life when the outer layers that you have worn for years begin to crack, and the version of yourself that you have been presenting to the world starts to feel unfamiliar, heavy, and distant from your truth. You wake up one day realizing that you have been moving through life almost automatically, following patterns that no longer reflect who you are or who you want to be. This awareness does not appear suddenly in a dramatic moment, but grows slowly within you like a soft but persistent ache, a subtle heaviness that reminds you that something is not aligned, that something deep within you is asking for attention, that a part of you is calling to be seen. This chapter is about that moment, the moment when you finally confront yourself with honesty, without excuses, without masks, without the stories you have been repeating to avoid facing the truth. Facing yourself is one of the hardest things you can do, not because the truth is unbearable, but because it requires you to peel away everything that protected you, justified you, distracted you, and numbed you. It requires courage to admit that you have outgrown the life you are living, that your habits no longer serve you, that your emotional reactions are echoes of old wounds, that your relationships mirror unresolved fears, and that the direction you are moving in may no longer lead to the person you want to become. This confrontation is not loud or dramatic. It is silent, private, and profoundly internal. It does not require audiences or explanations. It requires stillness, honesty, and the willingness to look inward without turning away.
When you choose to confront yourself, you begin to see the subtle truths that you ignored before. You notice how tired you are, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. You notice the weight of responsibilities you accepted without questioning, the roles you stepped into because they were expected of you, the dreams you abandoned because someone convinced you they were unrealistic, and the potential you suppressed because fear whispered that you were not ready. You notice how often you tried to meet everyone's expectations, and how rarely you stopped to ask what you truly want. You notice how much of your life has been shaped by noise rather than clarity, by pressure rather than choice, by habit rather than intention. This awareness can feel overwhelming because it forces you to see the gap between your current life and the life that reflects your truth. But this gap is not a failure. It is a map. It is an invitation to understand yourself more deeply, to trace the origins of your patterns, to observe your emotional landscape with compassion, and to recognize the ways you have been moving through life on autopilot. When you finally look at yourself without judgment, you begin to notice the silent battles you have been fighting, the ways you have been protecting yourself, and the quiet resilience that has carried you through moments you thought would break you. You begin to appreciate your journey instead of resenting it, because you start to understand that you survived the things you never acknowledged, and you carried burdens you never admitted, and now you finally have the chance to lay them down. The quiet confrontation with yourself also forces you to acknowledge the parts of your life that drain you, the relationships that no longer nourish you, the habits that steal your focus, and the routines that keep you stuck. You begin to see how many things you cling to out of comfort or fear or familiarity, not because they align with who you want to be. You see how much energy you invest in maintaining an image that does not match your truth, how much time you spend trying to hold together pieces of a life that you silently know is not meant for you anymore. This recognition is painful, but it is the kind of pain that leads to growth, because once you see the truth, you cannot return to old illusions.
As you dive deeper into yourself, you begin to understand the origins of your inner conflicts. You realize that much of your stress does not come from what happens around you, but from the stories you tell yourself about what happens. You see how your mind repeats old narratives, how it magnifies fears, how it protects you with assumptions and expectations shaped long ago. You start recognizing that the anxiety you feel is not always about the present moment, but about unhealed past experiences or imagined futures. You understand that your reactions are not always responses to the world, but echoes of earlier wounds. This understanding does not blame you. It frees you. It allows you to separate who you truly are
from the survival strategies you adopted along the way. In this confrontation, you begin to observe your inner world like someone stepping into a quiet room filled with forgotten memories, hidden emotions, and long-suppressed desires. You see the parts of you that wanted more but were afraid to ask for it, the parts that wanted to rest but kept pushing forward, the parts that longed for connection but settled for silence, and the parts that needed healing but kept pretending to be strong. You see the child within you who absorbed beliefs that no longer belonged to the person you were becoming, the teenager who formed insecurities based on moments that no longer define you, and the adult who continues to carry the weight of expectations you never chose. As you confront yourself, you begin to release these layers gently, not with anger or shame, but with understanding and compassion. Facing yourself also means acknowledging the dreams you silenced, not because they were impossible, but because you convinced yourself you were not ready. You begin to reconnect with the passions you buried under responsibility, the ideas you dismissed as unrealistic, and the ambitions you abandoned because you feared judgment or failure. You see that beneath all the noise, your true desires never disappeared. They simply waited for you to return. And when you finally listen, you realize that the life you want is not out of reach. It is simply on the other side of courage, clarity, and intentional effort.
As you continue this inner confrontation, you begin to notice the patterns in your thoughts, the rhythm of your emotions, and the themes that repeat across your life. You see the cycles you have been living in, the behaviors you keep returning to, and the choices you make unconsciously. With each insight, you begin to reclaim the authorship of your life. You understand that awareness is the first step toward transformation, and that change does not happen by force, but by understanding. You realize that you do not need to dismantle your entire life. You simply need to realign it with your truth, step by step, thought by thought, decision by decision. This process is not easy because it demands that you take responsibility for your life, not in a way that blames you for the past, but in a way that empowers you to shape the future. It requires you to admit where you allowed fear to guide you, where you settled for less than you deserved, where you avoided discomfort instead of pursuing growth, and where you betrayed your own needs in order to please others. These admissions are not meant to make you feel guilty. They are meant to set you free. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge, and you cannot rebuild a self you do not fully see.
But as you face these truths, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel lighter. The weight of pretending begins to lift. The burden of carrying unspoken emotions begins to ease. The fog of confusion begins to clear. You begin to see who you are beneath all the layers, and you start to feel a quiet strength rising from within you. It is not the loud, aggressive strength you may have admired in others, but a rooted, calm strength that grows from self-awareness. This strength becomes the foundation upon which you will rebuild your life. As you continue to confront yourself, you will realize that you are not broken, you are not behind, you are not lost beyond repair. You are simply at a moment where growth demands more honesty than comfort, more awareness than avoidance, and more courage than routine. You will understand that the emotional weight you feel is not a sign of failure, but a sign that you are finally ready to release what no longer belongs to you.
And this beginning is quiet. It does not require grand declarations or sudden changes. It requires presence, sincerity, and a gentle willingness to see yourself fully. Because once you truly see yourself, your fears, your desires, your wounds, your strengths, your possibilities, you unlock the door to a new version of your life. You discover that rebuilding yourself does not start with changing the world around you, but with understanding the world within you. And once that understanding is deep enough, once your inner clarity becomes steady, everything else in your life begins to shift naturally, intentionally, and authentically. This is the quiet confrontation with yourself. This is where rebirth begins. This is where the journey of disappearing and rebuilding truly starts.
Chapter 2. The Power of Stepping Away from the Noise. There comes a time when the noise around you becomes so loud that it no longer feels like background sound, but like a constant pressure on your mind, a weight that sits on your chest, a fog that clouds your vision. You try to think, but your thoughts scatter. You try to focus, but your attention slips away. You try to feel your own emotions, but they are drowned beneath the expectations, reactions, voices, and demands that surround you. It is in this moment that the idea of stepping away becomes not only appealing, but necessary. Not as a luxury, but as a form of survival. Stepping away from the noise is not a rejection of life, but a reconnection with yourself, because no one can hear their inner truth when the world is shouting at them from every direction. Noise comes in many forms. It is not only the literal sounds of a busy world, but the emotional noise of complicated relationships, the mental noise of overthinking, the digital noise that floods your mind with endless comparisons, and the internal noise created by unresolved feelings and unspoken fears. When the noise accumulates, your inner voice, your most reliable guide, becomes faint, almost impossible to hear. You begin to doubt yourself, to lose your sense of direction, to live reactively rather than intentionally. You move through days as if drifting, pulled by the current rather than steering your own course. Stepping away from the noise is the moment when you choose to reclaim the steering wheel of your life. To step away is to give yourself permission to pause. It is the conscious act of creating distance between you and everything that overwhelms you, so that you can finally breathe without being pulled in multiple directions. It is not a disappearance from responsibility, but a moment of clarity that helps you return stronger, cleaner in thought, sharper in intention, and truer to yourself. Many people fear stepping away because they believe the world will collapse without them, or that they will fall behind, or that others will judge their silence. But the truth is that you cannot give what you do not have, and you cannot guide your life when you are too exhausted to see the path. Stepping away is not abandonment, it is realignment.
When you allow yourself to step back from everything that consumes your energy, you begin to rediscover the quiet parts of your mind that have been ignored for too long. You notice the thoughts that were drowned out. You see the emotions that were too subtle to acknowledge. You understand the roots of the stress you thought was only surface level. In the silence of stepping away, things that once felt tangled begin to loosen. The confusion that once seemed impossible to navigate starts to make sense. You finally understand that your life has been filled with so much noise that you forgot what your own voice sounds like. As you move away from the noise, even slightly, the first thing you notice is how much tension you carry without realizing it. Your shoulders sink, your breath deepens, and your mind slows down. What once felt urgent no longer feels immediate. The things you once thought you needed to respond to instantly suddenly lose their grip on you. Space appears where there was none. Time expands where it once felt tight. The distance you create becomes a sacred boundary that allows you to see the world without being swallowed by it. Stepping away also reveals how deeply you were influenced by things that were never truly yours. You realize that many of your worries came from trying to meet expectations that did not belong to you, living by rules you never questioned, chasing goals that did not reflect your soul. You begin to see that your mind had become a crowded room where too many voices were speaking at once, leaving no room for your own truth to rise. In the silence of stepping away, you finally begin to ask the question that the noise prevented you from hearing. What do I want? For many, this question is difficult because they are so used to responding to life rather than shaping it. But you cannot find the answer unless you silence the world long enough to listen.
As you continue to step away, even temporarily, something profound starts to shift within you. You begin to feel yourself returning to the present moment in a way you have not felt in years. You notice small details around you, shifts in light, textures of silence, the sensation of your own breath, details that your busy mind had filtered out. You become aware of how fast your thoughts usually move and how unfamiliar stillness feels at first. But as your mind adjusts, stillness becomes not emptiness, but clarity, not loneliness, but presence, not isolation, but grounding. You realize that stepping away from noise is not stepping into nothingness, it is stepping into yourself. There is a kind of truth that only reveals itself in quiet. In noise, the mind reacts quickly, emotionally, impulsively. In quiet, the mind reflects. It sees without distortion. It understands without panic. It becomes honest, even painfully honest, because silence removes the shield of distraction. You begin to see the things you have been avoiding, the emotions you buried, the decisions you postponed. This can be uncomfortable, but it is also freeing, because honesty with yourself is the foundation of rebuilding. You cannot rebuild a life on top of noise. You can only rebuild it from the stillness where truth lives. Stepping away from the noise gives you the opportunity to examine your emotional landscape with clarity that noise never allowed. You start to recognize the feelings that were mixed together. Fear disguised as caution, fatigue misinterpreted as weakness, sadness mistaken for lack of motivation. You begin to separate them gently, understand them, and see the stories behind them. You realize that some of your reactions were not reflections of who you are, but of the noise that influenced you. This awareness softens you. It makes you kinder to yourself. It reminds you that you are not your stress, not your confusion, not your overwhelm. You are simply someone who has been living in too much noise for too long.
In stepping away, you begin to see how many things consume your energy unnecessarily. You notice the conversations that drain you, the habits that distract you, the digital clutter that hijacks your focus, the people who demand from you more than they give. You start to question why you allow certain patterns to continue and what they cost you. You see that your mental space has been filled with things that do not deserve to live there. And as you recognize this, you also begin to understand the value of your attention. You realize that your attention is not something to be given freely or carelessly. It is your life force, your creative energy, your emotional oxygen. Stepping away teaches you to protect it. This step back from noise also reveals the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependency. You notice which relationships uplift you and which drain you. You see who respects your silence and who becomes uncomfortable with it. You understand who values your presence and who values what you provide. In noise, these distinctions blur. In silence, they become clear. This clarity does not create conflict, it creates boundaries. It allows you to value your space without guilt and to choose relationships that reflect who you are becoming rather than who you were forced to be. As you continue to distance yourself from the noise, something else begins to change. Your thoughts slow down. The mind that once jumped from worry to worry, task to task, fear to fear, begins to move with more intention. Instead of reacting immediately, you begin to observe. Instead of assuming, you begin to question. Instead of being overwhelmed, you begin to prioritize. This shift is subtle, but powerful, because it marks the transition from living unconsciously to living consciously. Noise forces you into a reactive life. Quiet gives you a deliberate one.
And then, a deeper transformation begins. As the noise fades, your intuition, the quiet, steady voice inside you, becomes louder. You begin to feel what is right for you, even when it defies logic or expectation. You begin to know which direction to take, which choice feels aligned, which path resonates with your truth. This sense of inner knowing is something noise suppresses. It cannot survive in chaos, but it flourishes in stillness. When you step away, you reconnect with your intuition, and it becomes your compass. Stepping away from the noise also awakens a part of you that has been silent for too long, your creativity. Creativity is not only about art, it is about seeing possibilities, imagining alternatives, finding solutions, and shaping your life with intention. Noise suffocates creativity, but silence nourishes it. As you disconnect from the world's demands and return to yourself, ideas begin to arise naturally, effortlessly. You begin to feel like the world is opening rather than closing. You rediscover the capacity to build, to dream, to create, to transform. Over time, stepping away becomes less of an escape and more of a practice. You learn that you do not need to disappear entirely to find yourself. Sometimes you only need a few minutes of silence, a few steps back, a few breaths taken with intention. You learn that quiet is not something you visit occasionally, but something you cultivate within yourself. Noise will always exist, but your relationship with it changes. You learn not to let it enter the sacred space of your mind without permission. You learn to remain centered even when the world is chaotic. You learn that your inner world matters more than the outer noise.
In the end, stepping away from the noise is not about leaving the world behind. It is about returning to the world with clarity. You come back more grounded, more stable, more aware of yourself and your boundaries. You come back with a mind that sees clearly, a heart that feels authentically, and a spirit that moves with intention. You come back knowing that silence is not absence, but presence. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not weakness, but strength. And it is from this place of renewed clarity that the real rebuilding begins.
Chapter 3. Dismantling the Old Self. There comes a point in the journey of rebuilding when you realize that you cannot build a new life on top of the old one, that you cannot create clarity while still holding on to the habits, beliefs, and emotional weights that once defined you. Rebuilding does not begin with adding something new, it begins with letting go. It begins with dismantling the self that was shaped by fear, by pressure, by survival, by expectations, by moments that wounded you and moments that taught you to shrink. You cannot step into the next version of yourself while clinging to the patterns that belong to the past. The self that brought you here is not the self that will take you forward. And so, before the rebuilding begins, there must be a soft, honest, deliberate dismantling of everything that no longer aligns with the person you are becoming. Dismantling the old self is not destruction, it is liberation. It is the conscious act of peeling away the layers that were never truly yours, the layers you wore because you needed them at some point in your life, because they protected you or comforted you or made you feel safe when you were vulnerable. Many parts of your old self did not grow from your truth, but from your circumstances. They were built in moments of uncertainty, shaped by memories you did not choose, influenced by people who did not understand you, and reinforced by fears that you did not know how to confront at the time. When you dismantle the old self, you are not erasing your past. You are releasing what your past no longer needs to hold. The first thing you notice as you begin this process is how much of your identity was built unconsciously. You start to see that your habits were not choices, but reactions, that your priorities were shaped by others more than by yourself, that your emotional responses were inherited patterns rather than reflections of your present, and that much of who you believed yourself to be came from a time when you were simply trying to survive. You begin to understand that the version of you that exists today is a mosaic built from thousands of small moments, a word someone said that stayed with you for years, a disappointment that turned into a belief about yourself, a fear that became part of your personality, a wound that silently dictated your behavior. And as you see these pieces clearly, you realize that you can choose what stays and what goes.
Dismantling begins with awareness. It begins with the quiet recognition that certain parts of you feel heavy, restrictive, outdated, or misaligned. You feel it in the way you respond to stress, in the way you repeat old habits even when they drain you, in the way you stay in situations that no longer feed your spirit, in the way you choose familiarity over authenticity. You begin to see that your old self was built on foundations that were necessary once, but are no longer stable. You see that parts of you learn to hide rather than express, to endure rather than transform, to silence yourself rather than speak, to settle for less rather than seek more. And when this awareness rises, there is no turning back, because the truth has already begun to unravel the old patterns. As you go deeper into yourself, you begin to notice the beliefs that shaped your choices. You see the subtle statements you have repeated in your mind for years, the quiet doubts that whispered you weren't enough, the fears that told you not to try, the assumptions that convinced you that change was impossible, the expectations that forced you into roles that never fit you. You realize that many of the beliefs you carry were never examined, only inherited, absorbed, accepted. They were shaped by moments when you were vulnerable, by voices that did not know your truth, by wounds that convinced you that protection was more important than growth. And now, as you dismantle your old self, you begin to question those beliefs, gently but firmly. You begin to ask if they are still true, or if they were ever true, or if they are simply memories pretending to be reality. There is a unique kind of pain that comes with dismantling the old self, a pain that does not harm you but frees you. It is the ache of letting go of identities you once clung to, the uncomfort of releasing stories you repeated for years, the vulnerability of admitting that parts of your life were built on fear rather than intention. It is the pain of peeling away the layers that protected you and seeing what lies beneath. But this pain is sacred because it signals transformation. It means you are no longer willing to carry what weighs you down. It means you are choosing truth over comfort, clarity over denial, awakening over repetition.
One of the deepest parts of dismantling the old self is confronting the emotional residue that lingers inside you. Residue from past hurts, unspoken disappointments, unexpressed desires, suppressed tears, silenced anger, and forgotten dreams. These emotions do not disappear simply because time passed. They remain until they are acknowledged. They influence your relationships, your sense of worth, your decisions, your fears. Dismantling the old self means allowing these emotions to surface, not as judgments, not as punishments, but as parts of you that need to be understood and released. When you sit with your feelings without running from them, you begin to understand their origins. You realize that many of your reactions today are echoes of old pain. You see that your defensive walls were built by a younger version of you who did not know another way. And with this understanding, you can begin to gently dismantle those walls, creating space for something more authentic to grow. Dismantling the old self also means recognizing the roles you played for too long. You see where you tried to be the strong one, the reliable one, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the perfect one, the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacemaker. You see how these roles shaped your identity and how they often forced you to silence your needs, suppress your feelings, or shrink your truth. You begin to understand that the roles you played were responses to your environment, but they are not who you truly are. And in this realization, you feel a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years you lived in roles that did not reflect your soul, and relief because now you can choose again.
As you dismantle the old self, you become more sensitive to the patterns you repeat unconsciously. You notice how you react to certain situations, how you protect yourself, how you communicate, how you choose, how you respond to love, to conflict, to uncertainty. You begin to see where your patterns come from and why they persist. This awareness allows you to pause before repeating the same cycle. It gives you a moment of freedom, a moment where you can choose differently. And with each conscious choice, the old self loosens its grip, making room for the new self to emerge. Dismantling is not a quick process. It is slow, quiet, and deeply personal. It is not something others can do for you. It is not something you can rush. It is something you feel your way through, layer by layer, truth by truth. And as you continue, you begin to see that dismantling is not about losing yourself. It is about finding yourself beneath everything you once believed you had to be. It is about uncovering your authentic voice, your pure desires, your genuine strengths, your honest boundaries. It is about returning to the version of you that life tried to bury but could not extinguish. And as the layers fall away, you begin to feel lighter. You begin to see more clearly. You begin to breathe more freely. You realize that the old self was heavy because it carried too much that was never meant to be yours. You realize that rebuilding is not about becoming someone new, but about becoming someone true. You realize that every small shedding, every quiet letting go, every painful acknowledgement is a step toward the life you were meant to live.
The moment you begin to dismantle the old self is the moment you reclaim your freedom. It is the moment you choose growth over repetition. It is the moment you declare that you will no longer let your past dictate your future. And though the process is challenging, it is also beautiful, because it shows you who you are beneath everything you were taught to be. In the end, dismantling the old self is not an ending. It is the beginning of becoming. It is the clearing of the ground before you plant new seeds. It is the preparation of the soul before it rises. It is the silence before the new version of you takes its first breath. And it is from this place, this raw, honest, open place, that your true rebuilding can finally begin.
Chapter 4. Reprogramming the Mind. There comes a moment after the dismantling of the old self when you begin to realize that true transformation cannot be completed by removing old layers alone. It must also be built upon a new inner foundation. You cannot rebuild yourself while your mind still operates on the same invisible scripts that shaped your past. The thoughts you repeat, the stories you tell yourself, the meanings you attach to experiences, the assumptions you carry, and the silent beliefs that guide your choices, these form the architecture of your inner world. And unless this architecture is redesigned consciously, you will continue to live the same patterns in different forms, repeat the same cycles in new circumstances, and recreate the same inner limitations, even when your external life changes. Reprogramming the mind is not about forcing yourself to think positively, nor about denying pain or ignoring what is difficult. It is about learning to see reality through a clearer lens, about reclaiming authority over your inner narrative, and about guiding your thoughts instead of being controlled by them. The mind is shaped over years and sometimes decades by experiences you barely noticed, by words that stayed in you longer than the person who said them, by fears that entered quietly and built a home within you, by moments of confusion that turned into beliefs, and by worries that repeated so often they became part of your identity. Much of what you believe about yourself was not created by conscious choice, but by repetition. Repetition of thoughts, feelings, memories, interpretations, and emotional reactions. Repetition gave your mind a map, and your mind has been following that map automatically ever since. To reprogram your mind is to redraw this map with intentionality. It means interrupting the autopilot and redesigning the path on which your thoughts travel every day.
The first truth you begin to see in this chapter of transformation is that the mind is not a fixed entity. It is a living, changing, responsive system that adapts to what you feed it. It becomes what you repeatedly think. It grows in the directions you encourage. It reshapes itself around the meanings you assign to your experiences. Every thought you choose, every story you repeat, every belief you reinforce, these are tools of programming. Once you understand this, you no longer see your mind as a mystery or a burden or an enemy. You see it as a garden that reflects whatever is planted in it. Reprogramming begins with awareness, with noticing the thoughts that pass through you every day. You begin to observe how quickly your mind jumps to worry, or how naturally you assume the worst, or how easily you doubt yourself before giving yourself a chance. You notice how certain situations trigger the same narratives, how certain emotions pull you into old stories, how certain people awaken patterns that have lived inside you for too long. This awareness is not judgment, it is clarity. It is the first moment in which you can separate yourself from your thoughts instead of being absorbed by them. You begin to see that thoughts are not facts, they are interpretations. They are suggestions, not commands. And once you see them this way, you can begin to choose which thoughts to follow and which to release. As you explore the landscape of your mind, you start to see the silent beliefs that have shaped your life. These beliefs are not always loud or obvious. They are more like background music playing continuously, influencing your emotions, your choices, your reactions, and your expectations. Beliefs like, I am not enough, I must not fail, I cannot trust others, I always mess things up, I am behind, I must not disappoint others, I'm afraid to be vulnerable,
Disappoint anyone, or I am not worthy of good things. These beliefs often come from childhood experiences, from repeated messages, from painful moments that your younger self could not understand. They become part of your mental programming, not because they are true, but because they were repeated at a time when you were vulnerable. And unless you consciously challenge them, they continue to echo inside you even as you grow.
Reprogramming the mind requires the courage to question these beliefs, not with anger, but with curiosity. You begin to ask whether they reflect your truth or your wounds. You begin to see that many of them are outdated, rooted in moments you survived but never revisited. When you look at these beliefs with the awareness of who you are today, not who you were then, you begin to loosen their grip. You begin to see that the younger version of you adopted these beliefs to feel safe, but the wiser version of you does not need them anymore. And in letting go of them, you give yourself permission to expand into new ways of thinking. Another part of reprogramming the mind is understanding the stories you tell yourself about your life. The mind creates stories to make sense of experiences, but these stories often reflect your fears more than your truth. When something goes wrong, your mind searches for meaning and often chooses the story that aligns with past pain. When you feel insecure, your mind creates a story that confirms your fear. When you are uncertain, your mind builds a narrative based on old patterns. These stories become mental scripts that guide your emotions and decisions. But once you begin to see them as stories, not as reality, you gain the power to rewrite them.
Rewriting your inner story does not mean fabricating fantasies. It means shifting from interpretations rooted in fear to interpretations rooted in awareness. It means asking whether the meaning you give an experience is helping you grow or holding you back. It means choosing to see challenges as invitations to strengthen yourself rather than as evidence that you are failing. It means shifting your focus from what you lack to what you are capable of becoming. To reprogram your mind is not to lie to yourself. It is to tell yourself the truth without the distortion of fear. As you continue this work, you begin to see that your mind is not only shaped by your past, but also by your daily habits. The thoughts you entertain in the quiet moments, the content you consume, the conversations you engage in, the environments you choose, and the routines you follow. All of these are nutrients for the mind. Some nourish clarity, others feed confusion. Reprogramming your mind requires choosing what you expose yourself to. It is about creating mental environments that support your growth, filling your mind with ideas that expand you, surrounding yourself with people who reflect your best qualities, and protecting your attention from distractions that drain your energy. Your mind becomes the result of what you consistently allow inside it. Reprogramming also requires the development of emotional presence, the ability to sit with your emotions without being swallowed by them. Many mental patterns are built on the avoidance of discomfort. When an emotion arises, your mind reacts with fear, denial, or resistance, and these reactions create patterns that repeat over time. But when you learn to observe your emotions as sensations moving through you rather than as threats, your mind begins to soften. It begins to respond with curiosity instead of panic. It begins to understand that emotions are temporary, not identities. This emotional presence gives you the stability to choose new thoughts, even when old patterns try to pull you back. Another powerful step in reprogramming the mind is learning how to pause. The pause is a small but transformative moment between stimulus and response. It is the space where you choose whether to repeat an old pattern or create a new one. The pause interrupts automatic reactions, slows down racing thoughts, and gives you the chance to breathe before choosing how to respond. It is in the pause that reprogramming happens, not in grand declarations or massive changes, but in simple moments of awareness repeated over time. When you pause, you reclaim control. You choose intention over impulse. And with every pause, the old programming weakens while the new one strengthens. As the mind slowly reprograms itself, you begin to notice subtle but profound shifts. You feel less triggered by situations that once overwhelmed you. You react with more calm, more clarity, more maturity. You begin to trust yourself more because your thoughts no longer operate against you. You begin to focus more easily because your mind is no longer cluttered with unexamined beliefs. You begin to dream with more confidence because your inner voice is no longer drowned by fear. You begin to see your potential more clearly because you no longer view yourself through the lens of your past. Reprogramming the mind is a form of inner rebirth. It is the moment when you realize that you are not doomed to repeat anything, not the mistakes of your past, not the fears of your childhood, not the insecurities you learned, not the limitations you once accepted. It is the moment you understand that change is not only possible, but inevitable when awareness becomes your foundation. It is the moment you feel the inner shift from surviving to living, from reacting to choosing, from doubting to trusting, from limiting yourself to expanding beyond what you once thought possible.
This process does not end. The mind continues to adapt, continues to rewrite, continues to reshape itself based on the choices you make. But once you understand your own power, once you take responsibility for the thoughts you allow and the stories you nurture, you begin to live as the creator of your inner world, rather than as a victim of old programming. And from this new inner architecture, the rebuilding of your life begins to take form. Not from force, not from fear, but from clarity, intention, and a mind aligned with the person you are becoming.
Chapter 5. Finding Inner Peace. There comes a stage in the journey of rebuilding when you begin to understand that all transformation, no matter how external it may appear, is rooted in the movement of the inner world. You realize that peace is not something you find in the world around you, but something you uncover within yourself. It is not brought by silence, nor created by isolation, nor gifted by circumstances, but built from the way you relate to your thoughts, your emotions, your past, your fears, your desires, and your own presence. Inner peace is not the absence of noise or problems. It is the absence of inner conflict. It is the alignment between who you are, what you feel, and how you live. And finding this peace is one of the deepest steps in the process of rebuilding yourself. Inner peace begins with the understanding that your mind can either be your sanctuary or your battlefield. The world outside may be chaotic, but it is the world inside that shapes your experience of everything. Two people can live the same moment and feel entirely different things, not because the moment changed, but because the landscape within them is different. And so you begin to see that the true work of rebuilding is not in changing the world, but in changing the way your inner world responds to it. You begin to notice the storms your thoughts create, the tensions your judgments build, the heaviness your fears impose, the confusion your doubts nurture. You see that much of your suffering does not come from life itself, but from the resistance you carry toward what life brings. Finding inner peace requires the courage to look within without resistance. It requires the willingness to feel your emotions without rejecting them, to witness your thoughts without believing them, to observe your fears without letting them define you. It is not a passive state, but an active awareness, a choice to no longer be imprisoned by your own mind. You begin to see how often you wage silent battles against yourself, battles between who you are and who you think you should be, between your desires and your expectations, between your truths and the roles you feel obligated to play. And in this realization, you understand that peace is the moment you stop fighting yourself. One of the most profound steps in finding inner peace is acceptance. Acceptance of your present moment, acceptance of your emotions, acceptance of the parts of you that once felt unworthy or broken. Acceptance does not mean giving up or settling. It means meeting reality without resistance. When you resist what you feel, your emotions intensify. When you resist who you are, your identity fractures. When you resist your past, your pain deepens. But when you accept, you free the energy that was trapped in conflict. Acceptance is the quiet unfolding of peace within you. It is the recognition that you do not need to be perfect to be worthy of calm, that you do not need to have everything figured out to feel grounded, that you do not need to fight every emotion to be strong.
As you begin to accept yourself without conditions, the layers of tension you have carried for years begin to dissolve. You stop judging yourself for feeling too much or too little. You stop criticizing your pace, your progress, your vulnerabilities. You stop comparing your path to others, because you realize that peace cannot coexist with comparison. Comparison demands that you look outward. Peace demands that you return inward. And every time you return inward, you discover a deeper layer of yourself that had been waiting for your attention. Another essential part of finding inner peace is learning to quiet the mind, not by force, but by presence. The mind does not become peaceful by being silenced. It becomes peaceful by being understood. When you become present, fully present, the noise in your mind slows. Thoughts may still come, but they lose their urgency. You no longer chase them or run from them. You simply watch them pass, like clouds drifting in the sky. You begin to understand that your thoughts are not you. They are temporary movements within you. And as this understanding grows, the space between you and your thoughts widens, creating a quiet interior space where peace begins to bloom. Inner peace also requires releasing the narratives that have tied you to suffering. You start to see how much of your pain came not from what happened, but from the meaning you attached to what happened. You see how you interpret events through the lens of your past, how you relive old wounds through present situations, how you respond to life as if you are still the person you once were. When you release these narratives, you give yourself the chance to experience life freshly, without the shadows of yesterday. Letting go of these narratives does not erase your past. It liberates you from the grip it held over your present. As you go deeper into the process of finding inner peace, you begin to feel the importance of slowing down. For so long, your mind pushed you to move faster, to do more, to achieve more, to fix everything at once. But peace cannot be forced. It grows in stillness. It grows in moments when you breathe deeply, when you listen rather than rush, when you feel rather than react, when you exist rather than perform. The world has taught you to hurry, but your soul has always known that healing happens in slowness. And so, for the first time, you begin to honor the rhythm of your own heart, rather than the demands of the world around you. Inner peace also comes from the release of control. Much of your internal suffering comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. Other people, outcomes, timing, perceptions, the future. You exhaust yourself trying to predict and prevent and perfect. But when you begin to understand that control is an illusion, you feel something soften in you. You begin to trust the unfolding of your life. You begin to trust your resilience. You begin to trust that whatever comes, you can face it. Releasing control does not mean becoming passive. It means letting go of the anxiety that comes from fighting what is not yours to fight. And then, there is forgiveness, one of the deepest roots of inner peace. Forgiveness of others, yes, but even more importantly, forgiveness of yourself. Peace cannot grow in a place where you punish yourself for old mistakes, old decisions, old versions of you that did not know better. Forgiveness is not excusing your past. It is acknowledging your humanity. It is the moment when you say, I am allowed to grow beyond what I once was. It is the moment when you free yourself from the weight of regret and allow your present to breathe. You also begin to understand the importance of lightening your emotional load.
peace cannot coexist with constant overthinking, with emotional hoarding, with carrying stories that no longer belong to you. As you release these burdens, your inner world becomes spacious. You begin to feel what peace really is, an open space inside you where nothing feels rushed, where nothing feels forced, where your emotions flow instead of being trapped, where your mind expands instead of tightening, where your heart feels safe in its own rhythm. Over time, inner peace becomes a presence that you carry within you, not a state you visit occasionally. You begin to respond to life differently. You react less and observe more. You resist less and understand more. You cling less and allow more. Situations that once triggered you now pass through you without shaking your center. Emotions that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable. People who once disturbed your calm now reveal your boundaries instead of draining your energy. You find yourself speaking more gently, thinking more clearly, breathing more deeply. Peace becomes not something you seek, but something you become. Inner peace is not a final destination, it is a continuous practice. There will be days when your mind feels heavy, when old patterns resurface, when emotions come in waves, when the world feels loud again. But the difference is that you now know the way back to yourself. You know how to slow down, how to breathe, how to observe, how to return to the present moment. You know that peace is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of awareness. And once awareness is awakened, it never fully sleeps again. In the end, finding inner peace is finding your center. It is finding the still point within you that remains steady no matter how the world outside moves. It is the quiet recognition that you are not your thoughts, not your fears, not your past, not your wounds. You are the awareness behind all of them. You are the space in which they rise and fall. You are the calm underneath the chaos. And when you discover this, you realize that peace was never something outside you. It was the essence of who you were all along.
Chapter 6. The Healing Power of Healthy Solitude. There comes a turning point in the process of rebuilding yourself where you begin to understand that solitude, true solitude, not the loneliness born from abandonment or disconnection, is one of the most powerful forms of healing available to the human soul. For much of your life, you may have feared being alone, equating solitude with emptiness, silence with discomfort, distance with rejection. But as you move deeper into your transformation, you discover that solitude is not a void to escape, but a space to enter. It is a sanctuary where the noise fades, where masks fall away, where the truth becomes clearer, and where your relationship with yourself begins to mend. Solitude, when chosen with intention and embraced with openness.
Chapter 6. The Healing Power of Healthy Solitude. There comes a turning point in the process of rebuilding yourself, where you begin to understand that solitude, true solitude, not the loneliness born from abandonment or disconnection, is one of the most powerful forms of healing available to the human soul. For much of your life, you may have feared being alone, equating solitude with emptiness, silence with discomfort, distance with rejection. But as you move deeper into your transformation, you discover that solitude is not a void to escape, but a space to enter. It is a sanctuary where the noise fades, where masks fall away, where the truth becomes clearer, and where your relationship with yourself begins to mend. Solitude, when chosen with intention and embraced with openness, becomes a medicine that touches the places in you that no external relationship can reach. Healthy solitude is not isolation. Isolation is when you withdraw because you feel unworthy or afraid or overwhelmed, when you hide from the world because you believe you cannot face it. But solitude is different. Solitude is a deliberate act of turning inward, a conscious step back from the chaos of constant interaction,
a choice to sit with yourself, not as an escape from others, but as a return to your own essence. Isolation shrinks your world. Solitude expands it. Isolation suffocates. Solitude nourishes. Isolation creates distance from life. Solitude reconnects you to it. When you first begin to embrace solitude, it may feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. You may notice the discomfort that arises when you sit quietly without distractions. You may feel the urge to pick up your phone, to talk to someone, to fill the silence with noise. This restlessness is not a sign that solitude is wrong for you. It is a sign that you are meeting parts of yourself you have avoided for years. It is a sign that your inner world has become a stranger, and that solitude is the path home.
In solitude, the emotions you have suppressed begin to surface. Feelings you never gave space to: sadness, longing, regret, confusion, hope, rise gently to the surface. At first, this may feel overwhelming, but with time, you realize that these emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. They carry information about your needs, your wounds, your boundaries, your desires. Solitude gives them room to speak. And when you finally listen, healing begins, not through force, but through the simple act of presence. There is a profound clarity that emerges only in solitude. When you are constantly surrounded by people, your thoughts become entangled with their expectations, their perceptions, their opinions, and their needs. But in solitude, you begin to separate what is yours from what is not. You start to see which dreams are truly yours, which fears belong to your past, which desires come from your heart, and which pressures were imposed on you. This clarity does not come from thinking harder, but from listening deeper. It comes from being alone long enough for the dust to settle, for the fog to lift, for the mind to slow, and for your inner compass to point you gently toward your truth. Healthy solitude becomes transformative when you begin to enjoy your own company, not because you reject others, but because you finally feel at home within yourself. This enjoyment may begin subtly. You may find yourself wanting to spend a little more time in quiet places, taking slow walks, sitting in stillness, reflecting on your life, journaling, or simply breathing. These moments are not escapes. They are reconnections. They are reminders that you are whole even when you are alone, that your worth is not dependent on being seen, and that your value does not diminish in silence.
As you build a relationship with solitude, you begin to notice the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is a longing for connection, a sense of emotional absence, a feeling of being unseen or misunderstood. But aloneness, the healthy, chosen kind, feels spacious, grounded, liberating. It is the state of being with yourself without feeling empty. It is the experience of realizing that your own presence can be soothing, that your own mind can be peaceful, that your own heart can be a source of comfort. In solitude, you discover that being alone is not a punishment, but a privilege. Over time, solitude helps you strengthen your emotional independence. You begin to rely less on external validation, less on constant reassurance, less on the presence of others to feel stable. This does not mean you stop needing people. It means you stop depending on them to fill internal gaps. You stop looking outward for what must be cultivated inward. You learn to hold yourself through difficult moments, to soothe your own pain, to encourage yourself when you feel uncertain. This emotional maturity becomes one of the strongest foundations you can build upon, because it frees you from the fear of losing others and reconnects you with the power of not losing yourself. Healthy solitude also helps you refine your boundaries. When you spend time alone, you become aware of how different relationships affect your energy. You notice which interactions drain you and which nourish you. You begin to see where you have allowed others to take more than you had to offer, where you have said yes when you wanted to say no, where you have compromised your truth for acceptance, and where you have allowed your peace to be disturbed. Solitude brings these insights to light, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You begin to protect your energy not out of defensiveness, but out of self-respect.
As you build a relationship with solitude, you begin to notice the difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is a longing for connection, a sense of emotional absence, a feeling of being unseen or misunderstood. But aloneness, the healthy, chosen kind, feels spacious, grounded, liberating. It is the state of being with yourself without feeling empty. It is the experience of realizing that your own presence can be soothing, that your own mind can be peaceful, that your own heart can be a source of comfort. In solitude, you discover that being alone is not a punishment, but a privilege. Over time, solitude helps you strengthen your emotional independence. You begin to rely less on external validation, less on constant reassurance, less on the presence of others to feel stable. This does not mean you stop needing people. It means you stop depending on them to fill internal gaps. You stop looking outward for what must be cultivated inward. You learn to hold yourself through difficult moments, to soothe your own pain, to encourage yourself when you feel uncertain. This emotional maturity becomes one of the strongest foundations you can build upon, because it frees you from the fear of losing others and reconnects you with the power of not losing yourself. Healthy solitude also helps you refine your boundaries. When you spend time alone, you become aware of how different relationships affect your energy. You notice which interactions drain you and which nourish you. You begin to see where you have allowed others to take more than you had to offer, where you have said yes when you wanted to say no, where you have compromised your truth for acceptance, and where you have allowed your peace to be disturbed. Solitude brings these insights to light, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You begin to protect your energy not out of defensiveness, but out of self-respect.
As you deepen your connection with solitude, you begin to reclaim your imagination. The mind, when relieved from constant noise, becomes fertile ground for creativity. Ideas begin to flow, visions grow clearer, dreams expand. You start to rediscover the parts of yourself that were buried under the demands of daily life. Solitude helps you reconnect with your creativity because creativity thrives in spaciousness, not in rush, not in noise, not in constant distraction. It thrives in the quiet places where your inner world speaks the loudest. Another gift of solitude is the ability to hear your intuition more clearly. Intuition is a quiet voice, often drowned out by the noise of the world. But in solitude, you begin to feel it guiding you. You sense what is right for you, even if it is difficult. You feel the pull towards certain decisions and away from others. You learn to trust the subtle signals of your body, your heart, and your instincts. Intuition becomes your companion, your guide, your inner compass. And the more time you spend in healthy solitude, the sharper it becomes. There is also a spiritual dimension to solitude, one that transcends thought and emotion. In the stillness of being alone, you begin to feel connected to something larger than yourself. You feel a quiet sense of belonging, an inner harmony that is not dependent on circumstances, a sense of grounding that comes from simply existing. This is not a religious experience, but a human one. The experience of feeling whole, complete, and deeply rooted in your own presence. It is the kind of peace that cannot be found in noise.
Healthy solitude also helps you release unnecessary attachments. You begin to see how often you attached your identity to relationships, achievements, roles, or external symbols of worth. In solitude, these attachments loosen.
You realize that nothing outside you defines you. You begin to let go of the illusion that you need to be anything for anyone. You begin to shed identities that were imposed on you, expectations that weighed you down, comparisons that distorted your self-worth. You become lighter, freer, more authentic. Solitude becomes a place where you remove the masks you wore for survival and stand in the truth of who you are becoming. In this spaciousness, you learn the art of being. Not doing, not trying, not performing, just being. Many people live their entire lives without experiencing the simplicity of being with themselves without agenda. But when you do, something shifts. You begin to sense that your value does not come from productivity, that your worth is not tied to how busy you are, that your existence is enough. This realization heals wounds you did not know were open. It softens pressures you had placed on yourself. It reminds you that you are human before you are anything else. Eventually, solitude stops feeling like time away from life and begins to feel like part of life itself. It becomes a natural rhythm, a place you retreat to not because you are overwhelmed, but because it sustains you. Like sleep, like breath, like silence between words, solitude becomes necessary nourishment. And when you return to the world after moments of solitude, you return with more clarity, more patience, more intention, more compassion, and more presence.
Healthy solitude does not replace human connection, it enhances it. When you learn to be at peace with yourself, your relationships become healthier because you no longer seek completion from others. You no longer fear losing people because you are no longer afraid of being alone. You no longer settle for unfulfilling connections because you have experienced the richness of your own company. You love from a place of fullness rather than lack, from choice rather than need, from strength rather than fear. In the end, the healing power of solitude is not found in the absence of others, but in the presence of yourself. It is the discovery that you carry within you a refuge that cannot be taken away, a peace that cannot be stolen, a strength that does not depend on the outside world. It is the realization that the relationship you build with yourself is the foundation upon which every other part of your life will rest. And once you find this sacred solitude, you never truly lose it. You carry it with you, quietly, gently, like a flame that never goes out, illuminating your path as you continue becoming who you were meant to be.
Chapter 7. The relationships that elevate you and the relationships that drain you. There comes a moment in the journey of rebuilding yourself when you begin to realize that the quality of your inner world is deeply influenced by the people you allow into your outer world. No matter how strong, independent, or self-aware you become, your relationships shape the atmosphere of your life. They can elevate your spirit or weigh it down, inspire your growth or sabotage your progress, nourish your peace or consume your energy. And as you grow, your sensitivity to these dynamics becomes sharper. You begin to feel what you once ignored. You notice what you once tolerated. You understand what you once excused. It is in this stage of transformation that you must examine your relationships not through the lens of attachment or habit, but through the lens of truth. Every person you allow into your life affects your emotional climate. Some bring light, clarity, warmth, encouragement, and a sense of expansion. Others bring heaviness, confusion, tension, drama, and emotional noise. But you do not notice this difference until you have spent enough time with yourself, enough time building your inner stability, enough time finding your peace, enough time healing your wounds. Only then do you begin to feel the subtle shifts within you when you are around different kinds of people. Some people make you softer, others make you tense. Some people awaken your strength, others drain it. Some leave you feeling grounded, others leave you feeling lost. And the most profound realization of all is that your well-being is deeply tied to your willingness to choose wisely whom you keep close.
You begin to notice patterns in your relationships. You notice the people whose presence feels like a calm breeze, steady, gentle, reassuring, and the people whose presence feels like a storm you must prepare for. You realize that the relationships that elevate you do not demand that you shrink, hide, pretend, or sacrifice your truth. They do not require you to justify your emotions, silence your boundaries, or carry the emotional weight of others. The people who elevate you allow you to be fully yourself, without fear of judgment or rejection. They see your strength without being threatened by it. They see your vulnerability without taking advantage of it. Their energy does not impose on yours. It harmonizes with it. Meanwhile, the relationships that drain you are not always loud or destructive. Sometimes they're subtle. They exist in the form of people who constantly pull from your emotional reserves without ever giving back. People who depend on you for validation, attention, reassurance, or stability, while offering nothing that nourishes your growth. People who create emotional tension without acknowledging the impact of their actions. People who draw you into their storms, their dramas, their insecurities, their complaints, their fears. You begin to realize that emotional drainage does not always come from conflict. It often comes from imbalance. And when a relationship becomes a one-way flow of energy, you eventually feel depleted. As you grow, you also begin to understand that not every draining relationship is harmful in intention. Some people are simply not aligned with your new path. Their conversations remain rooted in negativity, gossip, comparison, or stagnation. Their worldview limits your expansion. Their presence keeps you anchored in a version of yourself that no longer exists. And this recognition can be painful because you may care deeply for these people. But transformation requires honesty. And honesty reveals that not everyone can accompany you into your next chapter.
You start to feel the importance of emotional reciprocity. You understand that relationships must be exchanges, not transactions, but exchanges of support, understanding, respect, and presence. When you share your truth, you deserve to be heard. When you express your feelings, you deserve to be held with empathy. When you show up for others, you deserve to have others show up for you. But reciprocity is not something you can force. It must come naturally. It must arise from mutual care, not obligation. And when it doesn't, you begin to question whether a connection truly deserves space in your life. In this phase of your growth, you may face an uncomfortable truth. You cannot save people by losing yourself. You cannot heal others by reopening your wounds. You cannot uplift those who refuse to stand. You cannot pour endlessly into relationships that leave you empty. For years, you may have taken on the role of the caretaker, the listener, the peacemaker, the one who absorbs the burdens of others. But with awareness comes the realization that carrying what is not yours is neither kindness nor strength. It is self-abandonment. And rebuilding yourself means refusing to abandon yourself again. Healthy relationships support your growth. They encourage your independence rather than demand your dependence. They celebrate your evolution rather than fear it. They do not guilt you for changing, outgrowing old patterns, or protecting your peace. Instead, they grow with you, or at least give you space to grow. Unhealthy relationships, on the other hand, resist your evolution. They pressure you to stay where you once were, because your growth reveals truths they are not ready to face.
They interpret your boundaries as rejection, your silence as distance, your transformation as betrayal. But these reactions are not reflections of your wrongdoing. They are reflections of their own unresolved struggles.
As you continue to rebuild, you begin to redefine what connection means. You start valuing relationships that are calm rather than exciting, steady rather than chaotic, supportive rather than draining. You start appreciating people who communicate honestly, who express their needs without manipulation, who respect your boundaries without resentment, who do not take your emotional labor for granted. You learn that real connection is rooted in honesty, trust, mutual respect, and emotional safety. It is not measured by how long you've known someone, but by how deeply your souls align. Another profound realization emerges. Sometimes the relationships that drain you are the ones you hold on to the tightest. You cling to them out of habit, history, loyalty, guilt, or fear of loneliness. You convince yourself that things will change, that the person will grow, that the dynamic will improve. But the more you hold on to what is draining you, the more you suffocate your own expansion. And so begins one of the hardest parts of rebuilding, letting go. Letting go does not always mean cutting people out of your life harshly. Sometimes it means loosening your emotional grip, stepping back, creating space, adjusting expectations, or shifting the level of access someone has to your energy. It means recognizing that you can love people without allowing them to disturb your peace. You can care for them without sacrificing yourself. You can wish them well without walking the same path. Letting go is not rejection, it is protection.
As you look deeper into your relationships, you also begin to notice the ones that elevate you, gently, steadily, consistently. These people may not be many, but their presence is grounding. They are the ones who listen without judgment, who speak with intention, who show up with sincerity. They are the ones who do not compete with you, who do not diminish your growth, who do not treat your vulnerability as weakness. With them, you feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. Their presence does not pressure you, but allows you to breathe. They do not push you toward versions of yourself that please them. They support you in becoming the version that is truest to your soul. Relationships that elevate you help you rise into who you are becoming. They encourage your healing, challenge your patterns gently, remind you of your worth, and reflect back to you the strength you sometimes forget you have. They are not perfect, but they are aligned. They do not demand that you dim your light, but help you shine it more steadily. And as you grow, you begin to realize something vital. You deserve relationships like these. You deserve to be surrounded by people who love you in your becoming, not just in your being. And as this understanding deepens, you begin to feel grateful for the people who bring peace into your life. They become reminders that connection is not meant to be draining, suffocating, or chaotic. That love is not meant to be loud, demanding, or exhausting. That friendship is not meant to be one-sided or burdensome. That relationships can be sources of strength rather than stress. And in this gratitude, you find a new truth. Peace is a prerequisite for closeness.
Chapter 8: Emotional Mastery and the Art of Understanding Your Inner World. There comes a point in the journey of rebuilding yourself when you realize that one of the greatest sources of inner strength is the ability to understand your own emotions. Not suppress them, not deny them, not judge them, but truly understand them. Emotional mastery is not the elimination of feeling. It is the ability to meet your emotions with awareness rather than fear, with curiosity rather than resistance, with presence rather than avoidance. Most people spend their lives being controlled by emotions they barely recognize, reacting to feelings they never paused to examine, and repeating patterns rooted in wounds that were never healed. But when you begin to explore your emotional world with honesty and patience, you discover that emotions are not your enemies, they are guides. Emotional mastery begins with slowing down enough to actually feel. For much of your life, you may have been taught to hide your emotions, to push them aside, to stay strong, to stay silent, to get over it, to put on a brave face, to function even when your inner world is breaking. Over time, you learn to move through life on autopilot, disconnected from the richness of your internal landscape. But feelings do not disappear simply because you ignore them. They sink deeper. They enter your decisions, your reactions, your relationships, your thoughts, your self-image, your dreams. They shape your life from the shadows.
Emotional mastery is the process of bringing these shadows into the light. When you begin to pay attention to your emotions, you start to see that each feeling carries a message. Fear tells you where you feel unsafe. Anger tells you where your boundaries were crossed. Sadness tells you what you long for. Anxiety tells you what you are avoiding. Emptiness tells you where you disconnected from yourself. Even joy and excitement carry messages about what nourishes you. But you cannot hear these messages if you rush past your emotions or react to them blindly. Emotional mastery requires sitting with your feelings long enough to understand why they appeared. Many people mistake emotional mastery for emotional control, but they are not the same. Emotional control is suppression. Emotional mastery is awareness. Suppression tightens your chest and numbs your heart. Mastery softens your body and opens your mind. Suppression demands perfection. Mastery embraces humanity. Suppression leads to emotional explosions. Mastery leads to emotional clarity. When you try to control your emotions, you become rigid. When you understand them, you become free. Part of emotional mastery is learning to observe your feelings without becoming them. You are not your anger, though anger may rise in you. You are not your sadness, though sadness may pass through you. You are not your fear, though fear may linger in your chest. When you see emotions as temporary experiences rather than permanent identities, you no longer feel overwhelmed by them. You no longer act impulsively or collapse into them. You begin to create space between the feeling and the reaction. This space, small at first, but growing with practice, is where emotional mastery lives. As you develop this awareness, you begin to notice the patterns of your emotional world. You see which situations stir old wounds, which people trigger unresolved hurt, which environments make your nervous system tense. You begin to recognize emotional habits, like shutting down when overwhelmed, becoming defensive when insecure, withdrawing when hurt, chasing validation when unsure. You begin to trace these habits back to the moments they were born. You realize that many of your emotional reactions today are rooted in experiences from years ago, sometimes from childhood, sometimes from relationships long ended, sometimes from moments you barely remember. This understanding does not blame your past, it frees you from its invisible grip. Another essential part of emotional mastery is learning to name what you feel. Many people live with vague emotional states they cannot identify. They say they feel bad, off, tired, or not themselves. But these words blur the truth. Emotional mastery requires clarity. When you name an emotion precisely, fear, envy, shame, loneliness, confusion, longing, vulnerability, excitement, guilt. You reduce its power. You bring it into consciousness. You transform it from something overwhelming to something understandable. Naming an emotion is not oversimplifying your inner world, it is illuminating it. And once you name your emotions, you can explore what lies beneath them. All emotions have roots, needs unmet, boundaries crossed, desires unexpressed, fears unhealed, truths ignored. Emotional mastery means asking, why am I feeling this way? What is this emotion trying to tell me? What memory does it awaken? What need does it reveal? What belief does it challenge? What lesson does it carry? This kind of introspection turns emotional discomfort into emotional intelligence.
You also begin to see the importance of responding rather than reacting. Reactions are fast, automatic, impulsive, driven by old patterns. Responses are slow, intentional, conscious, guided by awareness. Emotional mastery means learning to pause. The pause is powerful. It interrupts the momentum of your old emotional patterns. It gives you a moment to breathe, to choose, to reflect. In that pause, you reclaim your emotional freedom. You become someone who acts with clarity rather than someone who reacts from habit. As you continue this journey, you realize that emotional mastery is deeply tied to how gently you treat yourself. Harshness fuels emotional chaos. Judgment intensifies pain. Criticism deepens wounds. When you meet your emotions with harshness, you amplify them. But when you meet them with compassion, everything softens. Emotional mastery means speaking to yourself with the same kindness you offer others. It means allowing yourself to feel without labeling yourself as weak. It means recognizing that emotions are not flaws, they are signals. Over time, you begin to trust your emotions rather than fear them. You understand that they are not trying to break you, but guide you. Even the difficult emotions hold wisdom. Fear helps you identify danger or resistance. Sadness helps you process loss and let go. Anger helps you protect your boundaries. Anxiety reveals where your life is misaligned. Jealousy reveals what you desire but have suppressed. Loneliness reveals what parts of yourself you have abandoned. Every emotion becomes a teacher when you stop running from it.
And yet, emotional mastery is not only about understanding emotions, it is also about letting them flow. Emotions are energy meant to move through the body. When you hold them, they stagnate. When you repress them, they manifest as stress, fatigue, overthinking, or physical tension. Emotional mastery means allowing yourself to feel fully, not endlessly, but fully. You learn to let emotions pass through you like waves. You breathe through them, you honor them, and then you let them go. With time, emotional mastery reshapes your inner world entirely. You become calmer, not because your life is easier, but because your relationship with your emotions is healthier. You become clearer, not because you never feel confused, but because you listen to the messages behind the confusion. You become more grounded, not because challenges disappear, but because your emotional storms no longer sweep you away. Others may see your calm and assume you feel less, but the truth is you feel more, deeply, more honestly, more consciously. And this depth gives you strength. Emotional mastery also enriches your relationships. When you understand your own emotions, you become better at understanding others. You listen differently, more openly, without projecting your wounds onto them. You communicate differently, more clearly, without expecting others to guess your feelings. You love differently, more authentically, without fear or defensiveness. Emotional mastery turns relationships from battlegrounds into spaces of connection.
Eventually, you reach a point where emotional waves no longer frighten you. You understand that emotions rise and fall like tides. They come, they move, they go. You no longer panic at sadness, or resist fear, or drown in anger, or cling to happiness. You experience emotions without being consumed by them. You navigate your inner world with grace. You live with depth rather than drama. In the end, emotional mastery is not about becoming unshakable. It is about becoming aware. It is about knowing yourself so deeply that no emotional wave can disconnect you from your center. It is about embracing your humanity with tenderness. It is about realizing that your emotions are not obstacles on your path, they are the path. And when you reach this understanding, your emotional world becomes not a storm you fear, but a landscape you know how to walk through, with wisdom, with patience, and with a heart that is finally at home within itself.
There comes a moment in the journey of rebuilding yourself when you begin to realize that transformation is not merely a matter of changing habits or adjusting routines or correcting behaviors, but a profound internal rewriting of your entire relationship with life. You begin to see that you are not rebuilt from the outside in, but from the inside out. It is not your circumstances that shape who you become, but the meaning you attach to them. Not the events that define you, but the way your inner world responds to them. Not the past that dictates your future, but the interpretation you choose to carry forward. And so this chapter becomes the quiet turning point where you stop trying to fix the fragments of your life and start rewriting the very lens through which you experience the world. Rewriting your life from the inside out begins with the recognition that change is an internal shift of identity long before it becomes an external shift of behavior. You start sensing that your old self was built from a mixture of expectations, fears, conditioning, and survival. You realize that many of your choices were not really choices. They were responses, adaptations, defenses, patterns formed in moments you did not fully understand. And as you step into rebuilding, you begin to feel that you are no longer obligated to live as the person you once were. You are no longer required to carry the beliefs that shaped your past, the labels that confined your growth, the narratives that limited your identity. Rewriting begins with letting go of the old internal script, the one written in the language of fear, guilt, self-doubt, and inherited expectations. As you move through this inner rewriting, you begin to see that so much of what you thought was you was actually the voice of others inside your mind. You hear the echo of parents, teachers, friends, society, culture, past relationships, failures, criticisms, and fears that never belonged to you. You realize that most of your self-doubt was learned, not born. Most of your limitations were borrowed, not chosen.
Most of your insecurities were planted, not inherent. And in this realization, something within you softens, expands, and awakens. You begin to question every belief you once took for granted. What if the version of yourself you believed was not enough was never yours to begin with? What if your true self has been waiting beneath layers of conditioning, whispering softly beneath the noise? Rewriting your life requires deep honesty. The kind of honesty that is tender enough to hold your past without shame and strong enough to reshape your future without fear. You begin asking yourself questions you once avoided. What do I truly want? Who am I when I am not performing for anyone? What brings me alive? What drains me? What beliefs do I need to unlearn? What identity do I need to release? What truth have I been afraid to admit to myself? These questions do not demand quick answers. They require presence. They require silence. They require patience.
They require the willingness to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And with time, the answers begin to rise softly from the depths of your being, not as loud declarations, but as gentle inner knowing. As this internal rewriting unfolds, you begin to notice how your relationship with time changes. You stop rushing forward, trying to reach a version of yourself you think will finally feel whole. You stop living in the endless echo of your past. You begin to inhabit the present, not superficially, but consciously. You start to understand that the present moment is not a pause between what was and what will be, but the birthplace of who you are becoming. And so, you begin rewriting your relationship with time. You slow down, you soften, you breathe. You no longer chase life, you shape it from within.
May have believed that failure was proof of inadequacy, that pain was a threat, that uncertainty was danger. But now you begin to see that failure is feedback, that pain is information, that uncertainty is possibility. You start to treat each experience not as a verdict, but as a lesson. You begin to see that every challenge you survived carries wisdom, that every heartbreak carries clarity, that every ending carries an invitation to begin again. And with this understanding, the old pain that once imprisoned you becomes the soil from which your new self emerges. In this rewriting, you also begin to cultivate a new relationship with your mind. Instead of letting your thoughts dictate your identity, you start guiding them. Instead of allowing the past to shape your beliefs, you start shaping your beliefs consciously. You recognize that your thoughts are not truths, they are patterns, they are habits, they are echoes. And as you observe them with awareness, you gain the power to rewrite them. You choose thoughts that nourish you instead of deplete you. You choose interpretations that support your growth instead of limit it. You choose narratives that align with the self you are becoming, not the self you outgrew. Rewriting your life from the inside out also transforms your relationship with desire. You begin to give yourself permission to want, permission to dream bigger than your surroundings, permission to choose paths others do not understand, permission to redefine success according to your heart and not according to society. You begin feeling your desires not as fantasies, but as inner guidance. You realize that your desires are not random, they are directions. They point you toward your future. They reveal where your soul wants to go.
As this inner rewriting deepens, you begin to feel a new sense of alignment, a sense that your inner world and outer world are slowly becoming reflections of each other. Not perfectly, not instantly, but gradually. You start making decisions from clarity instead of fear. You start walking away from what harms your peace. You start choosing relationships that nourish your growth. You start creating habits that match your identity. You start speaking words that reflect your truth. You start moving through life with intention rather than reaction. And in this alignment, you realize that rebuilding yourself is not about creating a new self, but about uncovering the self you were meant to be before the world taught you otherwise. Rewriting your life from the inside out requires patience, because transformation is not linear. You will rise and fall. You will advance and retreat. You will understand and forget. You will build and break and build again. But each cycle will bring you closer to your essence. Each shift will reveal a deeper truth. Each layer you shed will bring you nearer to your center. And one day, without realizing it, you will wake up and feel different, not because the world changed, but because you did. You will feel lighter, not because your burdens disappeared, but because you stopped carrying what was never yours. You will feel clearer, not because confusion evaporated, but because your awareness expanded.
You will feel stronger, not because you stopped feeling pain, but because you learned how to hold it. You will feel freer, not because everything became easy, but because you finally understood that freedom begins in the mind.
In the end, rewriting your life from the inside out is about reclaiming your authorship. It is the moment you stop being a character in someone else's story and become the writer of your own. It is the moment you stop living by default and start living by design. It is the moment you awaken to the truth that your life does not change when your circumstances change. It changes when you change. And from that moment on, every choice you make becomes an act of creation. Every belief you adopt becomes a brushstroke in the portrait of your future. Every thought becomes a seed. Every step becomes a declaration. Every day becomes a new page. And the story you write will not be perfect, but it will finally be yours.
Awareness is the foundation of transformation. It is the quiet light that reveals the internal shifts long before they appear externally. It is the inner compass that guides you, even when the path ahead is unclear. It is the witness within you, the self that watches, understands, and grows. And with this awareness, you realize that rebuilding yourself was never about perfection. It was always about presence. It was always about choosing yourself. It was always about meeting your life with open eyes, open heart, and open mind. You begin to understand that healing is not a straight line, but a spiral. You revisit old lessons with deeper insight. You return to familiar emotions with greater understanding. You face familiar challenges with newfound strength. And through this cycle, you grow, not upward in a clean line, but inward into depth, wisdom, and self-truth.
Rebuilding yourself also teaches you tenderness. Not softness as weakness, but softness as strength. The strength to be truthful, the strength to be vulnerable, the strength to face yourself without turning away. And you realize that tenderness toward yourself is not optional, it is necessary. It is the soil from which growth emerges. It is the water that nourishes your transformation. It is the warmth that melts the frozen parts of your story. You also begin to feel a new relationship with life itself. You stop seeing life as something happening to you and start seeing it as something happening with you and within you. You no longer cling to certainty because you trust your ability to navigate uncertainty. You no longer fear endings because you trust the beginnings they create. You no longer resist change because you understand that life is not meant to stay still. It is meant to evolve, and so are you.
In this final reflection, you understand that the greatest rebuilding is not the one that changes your life externally, but the one that changes the way you inhabit your own soul. You realize that true peace comes not from avoiding chaos, but from finding your center within it. True strength comes not from appearing unbreakable, but from knowing you can rebuild yourself every time you break. True clarity comes not from having all the answers, but from trusting yourself enough to walk without them. And so, as this chapter closes, a new chapter quietly opens. Not because the book ends, but because growth never ends. You will continue to evolve. You will continue to shed and become. You will continue to meet new versions of yourself. And with each version, you will return more deeply to your essence. The journey of rebuilding yourself is the journey of returning home, to your truth, to your presence, to your inner peace. And now, you are no longer beginning. You are becoming. You are rebuilding. You are awakening. You are returning to yourself.